Hi guys. When working on a mix, you will probably find the occasional mono check to be a necessary part of your workflow, especially when it becomes harder to separate instruments out. The fact is, there is no escape in mono, and you have to work harder on your tones to make the instruments distinguishable from one another, as the case may be. The more I mix, the more I enlist the help of templates to speed up my workflow. And because I know I am likely to perform phase checks and some tonal balances in mono, I decided to incorporate this into a standard template which I import at the beginning of my mixing session. The issue with monitoring and mono is, of course, that because we now have instruments stacked vertically, we end up getting a level increase of about 3 decibels over the entire song. Our ears are more sensitive to particular frequencies than others at different volume levels. And so we want to ensure that when we are doing our balancing in mono, we are not unduly influenced by the sudden increase in volume. This is how I approach routing inside of Pro Tools to accommodate the need to both check in mono and without the influential gain increase from doing so. Here I have every instrument or group routed to a single master fader track, which I've named Trim. We essentially use this master fader to trim out the song before it gets sent to the inserts on our mix track. Having this ability helps us avoid overdriving or clipping the song before it gets there. The mix track is an aux track. This is where I perform any overall processing of the mix, so it's important that what we send there is not too hot before it hits any inserts. The mix track is an aux track because this, unlike a master fader, enables us to send the mix out to multiple paths at different volume levels. Take note that the mix track is solo safe, meaning that if we were to solo elements of our mix, then the mix track remains safe from being muted as a result of the soloed instrument. From the mix track, we are sending out to a master fader that feeds our print track, which is the subject of another video. Generally, I keep the print track muted until I need to hear it, and in such a case, I would make the stereo and mono monitoring sends inactive in order to avoid doubling up on the song at the output to the speakers, which could get very loud. Taking a closer look at the sends I've set up, the stereo monitoring path is pretty straightforward, as it's just sending the mix out directly to the speakers via the stereo track. The stereo track is just the default monitor path where your mix is normally sent to, and I've just renamed that stereo. The mono send is slightly different to the stereo send in that we have dropped it in level by 3 decibels to account for the inevitable volume increase that will happen when it gets fed through the mono track, where the left and right channels are now panned dead center, making for a mono output. The mono track then feeds into our stereo track, which, as we already know, is the path out to our speakers. Please note, as with our mix track, the mono track is solo safe for the same reason. It is important to note here too that in order to have pan pots available on the mono track, it also has to be an aux track. The stereo track is in fact a master fader. As you can see, you don't get the option to have pan pots on the output. Now we could set up the mono send to feed the stereo track with a mono signal before it gets there and just do away with having to use an aux track just to use its pan pots. However, this means that it would then route directly to the speakers, which has already been renamed stereo. This is a personal preference, but I would rather see the words stereo and mono on the two sends rather than seeing two sends both called stereo, and then having to go through the process of figuring out which send is which, and in turn taking myself out of the creative mindset. To switch between monitoring paths, you simply control or command click to deactivate one and activate the other. Why it's a good practice, I think, to run your mono monitoring send to an aux track first is because it enables you to place a one-band EQ with the phase flipped. This is a good safety net in the event that whilst you're listening to your song, you happen to accidentally activate both monitoring paths. And so at the very least, you'll cancel any information common to both tracks in the middle, rather than sending two lots of the same song to your speakers, which could hurt your ears and potentially damage your equipment. Whilst this probably isn't the most riveting tutorial, I understand, if I can impress on everyone the importance of having these types of things set up on a template, which you just import into the session you're working on, It can immediately get you working in a creative mode rather than having to think more technically about mixing and things that just aren't related to music. The more of this boring technical stuff you get out of the way, the sooner you can be mixing, which makes you efficient and your clients will appreciate your preparedness and the speed with which you can get straight to work. In the near future, I will take you through other aspects of what I think are essential to have in your ready made templates. Until next time, happy mixing. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for new tutorials, or would like to enlist my mixing services for your project, please email me at yamahadrums2009@hotmail.com, and please subscribe to remain informed of future video releases.